Hello, my name is Steve Quarles. During this video, I'll be talking about the vulnerability of attached decks to wildfire. Decks are used for many family and social activities. A deck that is attached to a home can threaten the home if the deck is ignited by the wildfire. Once ignited, a burning deck can threaten the home by breaking glass in a window or a sliding glass door, by igniting the siding and burning through the siding and into the home. Igniting siding can also burn up the siding to the under eave area and enter the attic space and ignite the home by that pathway. Minimizing the chance that a deck will ignite, and if it should ignite, minimizing the chance that the fire can spread to the home is an important part of hardening the home against wildfire. When a wildfire is threatening the home, the deck can be vulnerable from a surface fire burning along the ground toward the deck and the home, and from wind-blown embers that can threaten the deck from above. By developing and maintaining an effective defensible space around and under the deck, you can reduce the chance that a surface fire can reach your deck. Defensible space includes vegetation and other combustible materials and buildings or structures that are commonly located on a property. During a wildfire, wind-blown embers can travel distances that far exceed the size of most people's property, so the deck and area around and under the deck have to be resistant to the ignition from embers. It's important to remember that combustible items kept on the deck can also make the deck vulnerable to wildfire. Cushions, for example, should be brought inside before evacuation when a wildfire is threatening. Fibrous doormats and brooms are other examples of things that should be brought inside when a wildland fire is threatening. Unlike deck furniture that uses larger members, this wicker chair would also be vulnerable to ignition from embers because of the finer weave of the material and should also be brought inside. To minimize the opportunity for flames to reach the underside of the deck, it is important to eliminate or minimize the storage of combustible materials under the deck. The area under the deck on the right-hand side of this slide is much less vulnerable than the deck shown in the photograph on the left. Pine needles and leaf litter can accumulate within the lumber pile shown in the photo on the left, making ignition by embers much easier. It would be difficult for most decks to survive the flames that would develop should the boards stored under the deck ignite. For homes located on a slope with an overhanging deck, managing vegetation located downslope is a critical part of protecting the deck and the home. The homes shown on the left were destroyed when a crown fire burned upslope, allowing flames to contact the underside of the decks on these homes. Reducing ladder fuels and thinning trees to minimize the chance of a crown fire is an important protection measure in these situations. If vegetation on your property is mostly shrub and brush or grass, a non-combustible retaining wall located downslope of the home, as shown here, can reduce the chance that burning vegetation will threaten the deck and the home. The retaining wall can help deflect fire burning up the slope. If the property is forested, a crown fire will burn over top of the retaining wall, such as the one shown here, so it wouldn't provide any protection. Reducing ladder fuels and thinning trees would be your best bet in this situation. These photographs are from experiments conducted at the IBHS Research Center in Richburg, South Carolina. These experiments were conducted to evaluate the vulnerability of common decking products, including wood and plastic composites, to ignition from wind-blown embers. For decks attached to homes, the principal areas where embers accumulate are where it connects to the home and at a distance a few feet from the exterior wall. Note the number of embers at the exterior wall of the test building and to the right-hand side of the red arrow in the upper photos on the left and the right. Embers accumulate in the gaps between deck boards. Once entering this gap, embers will either land on the support joist, as shown in the yellow circled area, or fall all the way through the gap to the ground. Ignition of deck boards from embers will occur in these between deck board gaps. For this reason, it is important to remove needle and leaf litter and other debris from these areas. The other area where embers can readily accumulate is where the deck attaches to the house, so removing debris from this location is also important. A metal flashing could be installed at the deck-to-wall intersection, especially when you have a combustible siding material, as is the case for this home. To avoid moisture-related degradation problems such as rot, the flashing should slip underneath the overlap of the first or second siding courses. Enclosing decks has been suggested as a strategy that can be used to reduce the vulnerability of a deck. The objective of the enclosure is either to protect the structural framing and deck boards from flames, or protect materials stored under the deck from wind-blown embers. Decks can be enclosed horizontally by attaching panels to the bottom of the joists, as shown in the left-hand photograph, or vertically, as shown in the right-hand photograph. Unless the deck consists of a solid walking surface, for example, lightweight concrete, a horizontal enclosure should be avoided. As shown here, water damage, which can include decay of wood members and the corrosion of metal fasteners, will likely occur because water that enters the space below the deck boards cannot easily get out. A vertical enclosure, shown on the right, could protect stored materials from embers, but unless the space is adequately ventilated, the same moisture problems would occur. Screening the perimeter of the deck would allow for ventilation and minimize ember entry from the side, but as has been discussed, embers can readily enter the space below the deck from above. As shown in the upper left-hand photograph on this slide, embers will fall through the between deck board gaps in locations away from the joists. This is another argument for eliminating or minimizing the amount of combustibles under the deck, even if it's screened in. Fine fuels, such as pine needles in the photograph shown in this slide, can be ignited by embers that fall through the between deck board gaps. During this experiment, the front of the deck was vertically screened to minimize the entry of embers from this direction. As seen in the bottom photograph, fire eventually resulted in flames touching the underside of the deck boards. As previously stated, decks that are horizontally enclosed on the underside should have a solid walking surface, such as the tile surface shown here. These non-combustible decks are more expensive, but arguably reduce the vulnerability of the deck to the home. Where accessing the underdeck area to remove debris is difficult because of low clearance, such as the deck shown here, a vertical enclosure would be a good idea. This will minimize accumulation of debris and entry of embers from below. Embers will be able to enter into the space from above through the between deck board gaps. Enclosure should be with corrosion-resistant 1/8 inch mesh metal screening. Experiments conducted at the IBHS Research Center demonstrated that ember-ignited deck fires are initially small fires. In these photographs, ignition was only allowed to occur at one location in order to more closely monitor the spread of the fire to the test building. In an actual fire, multiple ignitions could occur on the deck, with multiple fires propagating to the home. Once the fire reached the home, ignition of combustible siding and other deck-to-wall attachment materials is likely, as is the growth of the fire. As shown here, deck fires can become large fires. Research has shown that this most often occurs when the fire starts because of ignition of fuels under the deck. When the underdeck fire burns through the deck board gaps, allowing the fire to spread to the surface, growth of the fire on top of the deck occurs. Ignition of cushions on deck furniture, use of a fire pit on the deck where the top of many deck boards ignite, usually because of low clearance between the fire pit and top of deck, and other scenarios where top of deck furnishings ignite can alter the general pattern of fire growth. Because of the wildfire threat to homes, many residents are interested in the fire rating of deck boards. Some deck boards and deck walking surfaces are non-combustible, for example, metal deck boards, lightweight concrete, or tile. But most of the deck board products commonly used today are combustible. The California Building Code provides a way for combustible deck board products to comply for use in wildfire-prone areas. Research has shown that lower density decking products such as redwood and western red cedar are much more vulnerable to ignition from embers than the higher density plastic composite materials and the higher density wood options such as ipe and other tropical hardwoods. All plastic composites have a higher density compared to redwood and cedar, so all will resist ignition from embers better. Removing debris that can accumulate in the gaps between deck boards is important. Replacing a deck board immediately adjacent to a home with a non-combustible deck board, a metal deck board for example, or a metal grate, will help protect the home even though there may be multiple ember ignitions. If the deck boards are parallel to the home, removal of the near home deck board and replacement with an alternate material will be easier than if the deck boards are perpendicular to the home. If you are building a new deck, use of metal joists will reduce the vulnerability of the deck, particularly if redwood or cedar is used as a decking material. Taking precautions to avoid a flaming exposure to the underside of the deck is an important part of any defensible space plan and a critical strategy in reducing the vulnerability of a deck to wildland fire. Questions are often asked about the use of coatings, either regarding their potential fire retardancy or, in the case of stains for wood decks, whether they can increase the flammability. Fire retardant coatings do not weather well when used in outdoor locations, and therefore they are not recommended for use on decks or siding. Don't rely on coatings to protect your deck, but don't worry about them in terms of making it more hazardous. I hope you have found information presented in this video helpful. For more information and useful links, please visit firesafemarin.org. Thank you so much.